All right, to continue now. British reach out to now the British say, what do we do? What do we do? Oh my God, the peasants are revolting. Pun intended. Right. You know, get it? Revolting and revolting. You don't get it, but it's okay. Thandi ho gayi, chalo khair. William Wilson Hunter proposed the policy of improving the fortunes of the upper classes, the Musliman aristocracy. पहले तो उन्होंने मुसलमान aristocracy बेचारे की धज्जियां उड़ा दी, जैसे मैंने आपको बताया. फिर उन्होंने कहा नहीं, चलो अब इनको कुछ थोड़ा सा दे भी देते हैं, ठीक है ना? Let's bring them back up. And what does he say? He says, a rising generation of Mohammedans, they always wrote Mohammedans. God knows why, it sounds really racist to me now, but anyway, no longer learned in their own narrow learning, nor imbued wholly with the bitter doctrines of their medieval law, but tinctured with the sober and genial knowledge of the West. Oh my God, if you could, hit me with an Orientalist hammer, At the same time, they would have a sufficient acquaintance with their religious code to command the respect of their community, while an English training would secure them an entry into the lucrative walks of life. कैसा conspiracy theory par excellence. ठीक है, इतने मुसलमान होने चाहिए that other people think of them as Muslims. मगर असल में they should be goras. वो क्या कहते हैं? Oreo cookie. Black on the outside and white on the inside. Coconut. ठीक है? So that's what they start to create. And they set up schools and colleges, Aitchison College. How many studied from Aitchison College? सिर्फ मेरा हाथ खड़ा है. Because I went to Aitchison College. And all of your government college, Aitchison College, Punjab University, वगैरह वगैरह सारी जो यूनिवर्सिटीज़ ब्रिटिश पीरियड में खड़ी हुई वो इसी मकसद से खड़ी हुई, इसी पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से. सो और एजुकेशन पॉलिसी मकॉली की अगर आपने कोट पढ़ी हो तो वो भी यही कोट है. सो नाउ एंड ऑफ कोर्स दैट कंटिन्यूड, राइट? देयर इज द इंग्लिश मीडियम और modeled on Oxford Cambridge school system, right? And now of course we have done a little bit of innovation and we're like, okay, no, we're not going to do with Oxford Cambridge, what we're going to do is Harvard. And so we created LUMS. Yes, LUMS, did you know, was modeled on Harvard. No, it's not Harvard, come on, it's Harvard. Okay, you have to say it right, okay? LUMS was modeled on Harvard. So like we're going to go with the Americans, okay? Brits kafi kar liya, let's try something new. Flavor change, okay? But idea was the same. But one of the key figures, and very interesting figure, because he's got some amazing stuff to say, you don't have to agree with him, but you got to know about him because he's so fascinating, right? Is Sir Syed Ahmad Khan. Sir is not his name is Syed Ahmad Khan. I don't know, when they told us Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, I thought that was his name. But actually that's not his name. Actually he was knighted, as you can see. He was knighted, and that's why the British called him Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, right? अब हमें इतना शौक है इस नाइटिंग का कि वो हर बंदा ही सर हो गया, ठीक है ना? गुजर रहा था सर कैसे हैं आप, ठीक है? I don't know, खैर छोड़ो. So he wrote in after the War of Independence the causes of the Indian revolt, and you'd think that he would argue the case कि अंग्रेजों से बड़ा गलत कीता, but no, that's not his argument at all. In fact, he is very, very pro-British. He's like, Britain is the best government we could ever have. And he really thought that, what his own community had done and the Mughals, etc. He said, हम तो बिल्कुल ही दकियानूस किस्म के लोग हैं. हमें तो पता ही नहीं दुनिया के अंदर क्या, हम backward लोग हैं, he said. So he said, for example, if separate regiments of Hindus and separate regiments of Mohammedans had been raised, this feeling of brotherhood could not have arisen. And in my opinion, the Mohammedan regiments would not have refused to receive the new cartridges. So ये इकट्ठे आपने लड़ाया ना इनको, इकट्ठे बैठे, इकट्ठे रहे, इकट्ठे खाना खाया. That's why they're united. You have to keep them separate. Interesting. And then he says that the English, in fact, had surpassed Muslims in terms of learning and culture. Muslims should stop living in the glory of the past. I've got to agree with him there, man. Always living in the past, There was no essential difference between Christianity and Islam, he argued. Thoda fark hai, it's not an essential difference, not a big difference. We should not consider them kafir and so on. Muslims should learn English and support the British. All of you are the children, all of us, I count myself in it. We are the children of Sir Syed. Yeah? Because he told the Ashrafi Muslims, kya kar rahe ho? Bacche ko Angrezi padhao. And so then they say, acha, Syed sahab, padha de? Unhone kaha, padhao. ठीक है, उन्होंने पढ़ाना शुरू किया. So this changed the way in which education was approached by the Ashrafi Muslim elite. He changed the views of the elite. He also said that Muslims should rethink their religion in light of science. So he proposed, he said some really fascinating things, like, for example, he said, jinn nahi hote. He said jinns are just a tribe that used to live in Arabia, and they were just really hotheads. They used to get into a temper all the time. And this thing, कहते हैं ना, jinn means aag bagola. ये बड़े आग बगोला किस्म के लोग हैं. That's why. That's what jinn means. It's no real jinn, in fact. So he took many decades, in fact, to write his tafsir of the Quran, and it was a reinterpretation of the Quran, and all of it was done in a naturalist spirit, to reconcile the Quran with modern science. So he said we have misunderstood the Quran, and where it is talking about miracles and so on and so forth, or not miracles necessarily, not prophetic miracles, but certainly supernatural things where it's talking about, we have misunderstood them. The actual lesson is about moral change and ethical behavior and so on. You've heard that argument? It comes from him. He's the father of the argument. Okay? He established the Aligarh University. He was, the traditional ulema, which was the vast majority of the ulema, used to call him, they had a name for him. They used to call him Nachiri. Cool name, huh? They also called him Kafir and all the rest of it, Mulhid and so on. But Nachiri I really like. So we could start a society here called Nachiri Society. People would think it's environmentalist, but little would they know that actually it's celebrating Sayyid Ahmad Khan. Okay, no, don't start that society, just as Imzaq kar raha tha. Okay, I love this phrase by him. I really like it. The word of God must be in harmony with the work of God. The created universe and what we've understood about it must be in harmony. The two must be in harmony. Love that phrase. Beautiful. So Sayyid Ahmad Khan also was very much against the Congress. Now the Congress starts to rise, and he considered it a seditious party, and urged Indian Muslims to stay away from anti-British and anti-colonial politics. He said, "Inke paas na jana, please. ठीक है? Stay loyal to the British. We are behind. The Hindus have gotten ahead. We are in education way behind. We've got to catch up. And please don't take any panga now with the British. They are a good government. They are not, they are not they're not a Muslim government, but we are thriving under them, and we must learn from them, and we must learn science from them. So don't get involved in this anti-colonial nationalist politics." The Congress is in reality a civil war without arms, he says. Right? We also like a civil war, but not a civil war without arms. We like it with arms. If it was a bid for power to be surrendered by the British, the open competition for it should not be of the kind held for entry to the Indian civil service, but one in which Muslims were allowed to use the pen of our ancestors, who had used not black, but red ink, which flows from the bodies of men. Agar civil war ladni hai, so we will not fight with pens, we will fight with blood. Of course, that's not what it's metaphorical. So what he's saying is we're not going to get involved with these people. The brave Pathan and the brave Rajput had not forgotten the swords of their ancestors and would not agree to be ruled by a Bengali who at sight of a table knife would crawl under the chair. Cricket team wale na ye padhne ki galti se. Pretty powerful rhetoric, but not necessarily one that you may agree with today, right? Not very PC, I'd certainly say. Maybe even racist. But the point actually is not about the Bengalis. The point actually is don't get involved with the Congress. So now Indian nationalism, what was it? How did it come up? So in 1885, the British civil servant Alan Octavian Hume set up the Indian National Congress. He invited some of the influential figures in Indian intellectual circles and so on, and in politics as well, to come and meet with him. It grew more radical and formed two wings by 1905. One was headed by Tilak, the other was headed by Gokhale. This is Gokhale, this is Tilak. Gokhale was a moderate. He said constitutional law ke andar reh ke, अच्छे बच्चे बन के शीशे मोरे पाके नाले तेल लगा के नाले काली अखियाँ सुरमा पाके you know where that comes from. हमने आज़ादी हासिल करनी है, ठीक है? And Tilak was the bad boy. It was like, oh, I'm not going to do it that way. I'm not going to play your constitutional game. I'm going to get into agitation. I'm going to fight you, and so on and so forth, right? But also there were very important other differences, which was that Tilak was very much a conservative and Gokhale was very much a liberal in other matters. Like, for example, In 1891 too, the British introduced a bill called the Age of Consent, जिसमें उन्होंने ये कहा कि बच्चियों की शादी 10 साल में नहीं 12 साल में होनी चाहिए. 12 साल के बाद आप शादी कर सकते. 13 साल की उम्र पे बच्चियों की शादी करते हैं. तो गोखले साइड बिल्कुल ठीक है, कोई मसला नहीं है, ऊपर करो एज ऑफ कंसेंट, नो प्रॉब्लम. बच्चों की शादी नहीं होनी चाहिए, 10 साल की बच्ची की शादी नहीं होनी चाहिए. बट तिलक साइड भाई आपको क्या हक पहुंचता है कि हमारे कानून के अंदर आप तब्दीली करें. आप निकले मुल्क से, हम जब आज़ाद होंगे फिर हम खुद फैसला करेंगे कि हमने करना है या नहीं करना. ठीक है. सो ही अपोज दैट चाइल्ड कंसेंट बिल. The British called him the father of the Indian unrest, and he was, in his time, the most popular political leader at that time. So, in 1905, as the Congress began to mobilize and began to gain strength, and it was always going to gain, the anti-colonial movement was always going to be strongest in Bengal. Why? Because Bengal is the first area of India to be conquered. It was the capital of the Brits. It's where they did their social engineering the most. And it's where the results of their social engineering were the most glaring. And that's why Bengal was always the seedbed of revolt. And that's why the British hated Bengalis. They loved Punjabis, but they hated Bengalis. Like, Bengalis are terrible people. Why did they hate them? Because they were always revolting. हर वक्त revolution शुरू कर देते थे. They were like the French of India, right? The French also are known for starting revolutions. Oh, it seems like it's going to rain today. I think I'm going to start a revolution. You know. So in 1905, the British decided that they're going to divide Bengal. Why? To stem the tide of Bengali anti-colonial movement. To weaken the anti-colonial movement, which was now coming to support Congress, etc. So Bengali Muslims, encouraged by the British, supported this partition. Because the Bengali Muslims now thought, oh, this is East Bengal and West Bengal, etc. They thought, this is pretty cool, man. Viceroy Curzon said that partition would, quote, invest the Mohammedans in Eastern Bengal with a unity which they have not enjoyed since the old days of old Musliman viceroys and kings. देखो आपका अपना सूबा होगा, मुसलमान हो, साडा अपना सूबा, खुश हो गए. मगर इसके पीछे एक और वजह भी थी. The upper classes of the Ashrafi Muslims, you know, were going to get new jobs and so on, because now the administration was going to open up to them. The upper echelons of the East Bengal administration were Hindus, etc. They would move out, etc. And the Muslims would get those positions. And the peasantry of East Bengal, as I told you, there was a very strong divide, with the landlords being Hindus mainly and the peasantry being Muslims. And so they thought, this is great, because then now there can be a land reform and we can get access to land. So there was this sort of angle in the whole particular thing. Anyway, but all over India, there was agitation against this. The Congress was totally opposed. They said, this is divide and rule. You are trying to divide us. In order to rule us, you're creating these frictions between Muslims and you know, Hindus, etc. There's a deliberate strategy. And Bengalis really felt like they are one nation. They are one people, etc. You're taking away their identity, X, Y, Z, blah, blah, blah. The rest of it. पूरे India में जो है, इस पे एहतजाज हुए. And as the एहतजाज grew, etc., finally they had to reverse it in 1911. Now this partition of Bengal did something very curious, which is that it woke up the Muslims of Bengal to the idea that they need to organize as Muslims of Bengal to fight for certain rights within the context of Bengal. And so immediately after the partition of Bengal, you had the emergence of a new political party, which is in 1906 the Muslim League. Thank you. Okay? So that's when Muslim League emerges. So now the agitation against the partition of Bengal turns the Congress party for the first time into a serious mass party. And the Swadeshi movement, which says that we should not buy from abroad, but we should make these things ourselves, whether that's cotton or whatever, beginning in Calcutta, gives the Congress party its first big mass base. As the mass base develops, in 1905, as all of this is going on in India, in 1905, the Liberals come to power after an election in the UK. When they come to power, they are committed to the idea that we must also give the Indians some form of representation, because they're Liberals, and Liberals are like tree hugging, whatever. No, they're not. But anyway, the point is, they're not hippies. But the point is that they feel that they have to give some representation to Indians in the Indian administration. It's a huge administration, okay? Massive administration. There are very few Goras who are in India running the Indian administration, and they can't anyway do it without Indian help. and in the Indian civil service, etc., and other places, and so on. There's chock-a-block full of Indians in the lower administration of the state. So they're like, all right, we need to give them some representation. It will allow things to function better. So these reforms, known as the Minto-Morley reforms, were ones in which in the legislatures on the basis of the Indian Councils Act, Indians could now be elected into provincial positions, etc. These reforms were seen by the pro-British upper-class Muslims as a major concession to Congress. So they felt that ye to Congress to kamyab ho gayi hai. After its anti-Bengal partition agitation, you see now that the momentum is shifting, and the British are saying, we need to give these people some representation. So now the pro-British ruling class amongst the Muslims that the British created after the 1857 war in order to pacify the Muslim community, because the Muslims really did fight hard in the 1857 war, so did the Hindus, etc. They both fought. And so to pacify, each they did various things. To pacify the Muslims, they created this, as I told you. They brought the Ashrafis into their embrace, so to speak, right? And now these Ashrafis who were in the embrace of the British, they began to feel very, very threatened. They began to feel like these Minto-Morley reforms, they were very conservative in politics. They were pro-Tory party in the UK, not pro-liberal party, etc. So they began to feel like this was a major concession to Congress. In reaction, the Muslim League under the leadership of Aga Khan III, who's you can see over here, raised the demand for separate electorates. And which basically, what does that mean? What that means is basically that Muslims will vote for Muslims on special seats. And what that means is, of course, that Muslims will have representation which is in excess of their population. Okay, so if they're like 25% of the population, they get to have 30 or maybe 35% representation in the seats in the assemblies. In 1909, the British granted separate electorates to Muslims. They said, okay, we're going to concede to this. In the UP province, for example, they were about 14% of the population, but they had 50-50 seats with the Hindus, which were 85%. In the provincial councils, they had 7 out of 20 elective seats. The principle was later incorporated also into the Government of India Act 1935. So you see now that the Muslim League under Aga Khan and Sayyid Amir Ali, etc., basically make the argument to the British that you should not just treat us as one person, one vote, but you should treat us as a separate community. They haven't made the argument yet that we are a nation, but they've said we are a community, and hence we should be represented as a community, and hence our representation should be slightly higher than our numbers. That is the main argument. And the British were ready and willing to concede to this. Why were they ready and willing to concede to this? If you ask a congressperson, they will tell you they were ready and willing to concede to it because they wanted to use the Ashrafi Muslims to dampen the anti-colonial movement. Okay, so that's Sayyid Amir Ali. These were the two main leaders of the Muslim League, not Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Okay, shocker of shockers. What? He was not even a member of the Muslim League. What was he a member of? You didn't say that. What? Are you sure?
He only left after Mahatma Gandhi came.
That is correct. He was a member, and not just any member. He was one of the leaders of the All India Congress, committed to but committed to Indian independence and the end of colonialism, and a leader of the Congress party. So the establishment of separate electorates had a very strong impact on Muslims all over, and on politics generally all over India. The first was now the establishment of the principle that only a Muslim could really, truly, honestly represent a Muslim. Like only a woman can only truly, honestly represent a woman, or only a working class person can truly, honestly represent a working class person, etc., etc. It communalized electoral politics at the local level. What I mean is that now Muslim politicians appeal to the Muslim community, and they couldn't go back on this because this was such a major, cool thing that they got. They're like, no Muslim politician was going to stand up and say, I am against separate electorates because we have too many seats in the parliament. We should give up some of our seats. No, nobody's going to stand up and say that, because the electorate would say, why would you do that? I mean, we've got more bargaining power. Why should we give that up on that? So that had a very strong impact that way. It showed that the British were willing to make concessions to the Muslims if their demand was presented as the demand of a community rather than as a community, later you'll see that this idea of community becomes a nation. So it had to be presented in a different way, and the different way that, under which the British would agree to the argument was that it's not just about numbers, it's about the fact that we are a distinct community. Okay. So Jinnah was the part of Congress party. Yes, you're absolutely. Member, leader of the Congress party, very close to Gokhale. He was on the moderate side of the Congress party in both ways. In the way that he was very much in favor of the kind of liberal reforms that are associated generally with democratic politics, whether that's many things. By the way, many of you may not know, Jinnah was also a trade unionist. He also believed in workers' rights. And he, as a lawyer, fought for many, many working class cases for workers, etc. He was also in favor of civil marriage, which meant a non-religious marriage, marriage between a Muslim and a Hindu outside of religion in a court, etc. He was in favor of that. And so he really was a very powerful, strong voice in Indian national politics, and not wrongly considered the ambassador of Hindu-Muslim unity. And also he was part of the Gokhale faction in the sense that he believed that Britain would eventually give independence to India, but that this was something that we had to make the case for, as a good lawyer, as a good constitutional lawyer makes the case for a particular change, etc. So he didn't really believe that street agitation and ladai and fasad and that sort of stuff would win independence, although it could. But that's not the path that he wanted to take. So he was at this time, he was totally against this, the Muslim League, and against Aga Khan and Amir Ali, etc. And he said that these people are pro-British, number one. Jinnah was not pro-British in that way. Jinnah was genuinely a figure that believed that India needs to be an independent country. He was genuinely anti-colonial. You can read it, you can see it. It's a strong conviction in him that India must be free. That is absolutely the case. The Muslim League at that time displays no such commitment to to anti-colonialism. Okay? So that's the first basis of his disagreement. Secondly, he said, how can these people who are not elected claim to represent the Muslims of all of India? So he didn't accept that they represented the Muslims. He accepted that they represented themselves, but not the Muslims, etc. And thirdly, he felt that the principle of separate electorate was disuniting Indians and Hindus and Muslims. Not in 1905, not in 1906, not in 1909. In 1909, he was an all-India leader. He was not the leader of Muslims. He never thought of himself that मैं मुसलमानों का leader हूँ. He was a leader of the Congress party with Hindus and Muslims and everybody. He was a mainstream figure of the Congress party, one of the main leaders of the Congress party. So he was not thinking in terms of, I must represent the Muslim community, not at all. So yes, in 1909, he did stand as the Muslim representative on separate electorate, and he did win that election. Now keep in mind, this is not a popular election, okay? This is an election only in a very select franchise. Chand log vote kar sakte hain isme, okay? This is not a popular election, but he did win that election. And although he did disagree with separate electorates, but now that they had been created, he felt that, if he takes that and becomes part of the legislature, then he will be able to use it to voice anti-colonial ideas, which is not an incorrect argument in my view. So it's political strategy, tactics, etc. You have to use that as well. So he finally joined Muslim League in 1913, and it's by 1916 that he became the president of the Muslim League. And even then, when he became president of the Muslim League, very quickly, and at first he displaced Amir Ali and Aga Khan and became the president. Muslim League kind of bifurcated. And the pro-Jinnah folks basically became the Muslim League. etc. इनकी आपस में बीच में लड़ाई भी हुई. So the pro-Jinnah Muslim League then engineered the Lucknow Pact. And the Lucknow Pact was a pact between Congress and Muslim League over the principle of separate electorates, and he managed to get the Congress to accept now the principle of separate electorates, and managed also to come up with a formula whereby Congress and Muslim League would be able to manage the Muslim and separate electorate seats and everything. And for that, Congress party, obviously, whose leader he was, now he was leader of two parties. Check that, that's pretty cool, isn't it? And for that, Gokhale said he is the ambassador of Hindu-Muslim unity and so on. So there's no, Jinnah at this time, please, you have to be clear about this, is not thought of as a Muslim leader. He is thought of as an Indian leader of all of India. He was the leader of Congress. He was an Indian nationalist. He believed that the Congress party was leading a just struggle against colonialism. It's like, okay, sorry for causing cognitive dissonance over here, okay? But that's what he was at that time. He was not like he wasn't trying to fool the Congress and get into it and then, no. He was a genuine leader who believed that Indians, all of them, Muslims, Hindus, everybody needs to come together and work to end colonialism. And we're all going to come together and do this. And there's no this thing of, okay, you're Muslim and you're Hindu. No, we're all united in this struggle. That was his program. That was Congress's program at the time. And that's what he stood for. He said, this is what I stand for. Okay? Well, I've told you that Aga Khan faction was now moved the other way, and the pro-Jinnah faction within the Muslim League approached Jinnah and said, we want you. And we want to find a reconciliation with Congress. We don't want an antagonistic relationship. So Muslim League actually split between pro-Jinnah and anti-Jinnah faction. Here's another interesting part of history. Sorry if it causes more cognitive dissonance. Muslim League split between pro-Jinnah and anti-Jinnah. Jinnah was such a towering figure that, you know, his influence split the Muslim League. And one side of it joined, asked him to join and then to be the president of the Muslim League. 1914, World War I breaks out. It's a very, very big event in all of his 20th century history. Changed the Naksha forever. Well, and in World War I, of course, World War I is what led to the Bolshevik Revolution, in this, the formation of the Soviet Union. It led to the changing of the entire map of Europe under the League of Nations and the emergence of new nations, etc. And one very important incident that it had, one very important impact that it had was that it broke up the largest and surviving empire of the Muslims, the Ottoman Empire. You can see, look how massive the Ottoman Empire is. It's huge! And it's protecting the shrines of Makkah and Medina, etc. It's massive. And this is also colored in the Ottoman colors because the Mughals also thought that they were actually, in some way, part of the Ottoman Empire. So Ottoman Empire is massive. So Turkey decides to attack Russia. Russia is its conventional, this is Tsarist Russia, not Soviet Russia. Unki ladai hoti hai. Turkey begins to lose really badly. And the British also attack Turkey, etc. And Turkey is now dismembered. And I've got two people over here. And do you know who this guy is? This is Lawrence of Arabia, T.E. Lawrence. So he helped the British to raise a fuss over here, to basically raise a rebellion. And this is Ibn Saud, who helped the British also to break up the Ottoman Empire. So the Arabs, the British encouraged the Arabs to revolt against the Turks and helped, therefore, to break up the Ottoman Empire. You can imagine that Muslims were very unhappy with this. Right about this time when World War I is going on, Gandhi comes from South Africa to India. And in South Africa, he had organized, and I've been there where he did all that work, and I've seen the statues and everything. He organized the Indian workers in South Africa, and he was phenomenal at it, for their rights, etc. And he did a remarkable job there. And so he was already a bit of a hero when he came to India. But when he came to India, he came with a very different program. It was the program he perfected in South Africa. And that program was passive resistance. Do you know that nobody in the Congress party liked this program? They're like, pagal ho gaye. Passive resistance. What do you mean, hum tax nahi ada karenge? What do you mean, hum kya naam hai, janbooch ke kotapa khayenge, law todenge, kanun todenge? This is really, really not something we want at all. So Gandhi, although he was treated as a bit of a, you could say, a kind of like a curiosity within the Congress party. He was not one of the big leaders of the Congress party. Jinnah was. Irony, right? And Gandhi goes outside of the Congress party and creates his own little committee of followers, etc. And he makes some really strange, he has some really strange ideas about modernity. And so he hates modernity. You know, he's very religious, etc., in a very different kind of way. At the same time, he's also challenging his own religion. In his own ashram, he invited somebody who's an untouchable. His wife even revolted against him. He said, "Theek hai, if you want to leave me, that's fine. But I'm going to change this about our own religion." So he's a really kind of, you know, strange character. Nobody can really place him. He's like a holy man. He like doesn't wear any shoes. And he's wearing like a, you know, just a kapda. And he comes without his shoes and he sits down in this meeting of Congress people where everybody's dressed with a tie and everything, you know, super well dressed, etc. So he was an oddball. And Congress did not want to follow passive resistance, his program. Congress at this time was dominated by the Gokhale faction because Tilak had been removed from the Congress because he was considered too extremist. And Congress was now declining as a party because the moderates were not Awami folk who could mobilize the public. So what does Gandhi do? He comes out of the wilderness and he organizes this campaign against the Rowlatt Act, which was introduced in 1919, which basically allowed police powers to be extended beyond the war. Jang khatam ho gayi. During the war, you had very harsh police laws, but now the Rowlatt Act allowed those same laws and even harsher laws to continue to exist. Like, for example, they could arrest anybody and keep them without charging them as long as they wanted. They could arrest anybody, and under the Rowlatt Act, even if the crime had been committed before, or the alleged crime had been committed before the act was announced. So like crazy sort of stuff. Jinnah, everybody opposed it. They're like, this is crazy. But Gandhi, what he did was, he said, he launched a movement of passive resistance. He said, you know, we are not going to cooperate with the government. And he would give it a religious sort of cover, you could say tilt or whatever, that we're going to pray and we're going to do this, but we're not going to cooperate with the British government. This new tactic transformed Congress into a massive nationwide movement. And the main thing that Gandhi managed to do is he managed to get the peasants. He dressed like a peasant. He was able to talk the language of the peasants. He only spoke in Gujarati, etc., to the peasants. He wasn't speaking in English or whatnot. All the other Congress leaders were really good, English, tisham tat, whatever. But he was a very Awami. And now he was doing something which was really kind of dangerous. But he did it in a very strange kind of way. On the one hand, he was like, we must support the British war effort. So he started recruiting for the British army. So he's saying, I'm pro-British. I'm not anti-British. On the other hand, he's like saying, we're not going to cooperate with the British on this thing, on that thing, and then this law, on that law, etc. So both things are going on. So the British is like, this is like that song by Katy Perry, you're hot and you're cold. You know, you're like, it's confusing. You don't, you know, what are you? Are you pro-British, anti-British? What are you? Like on the one hand, he's pro, on the other hand, he's anti, he's just confusing everybody. Okay? But the passive resistance worked. Boom! Congress gets transformed into a huge mass organization. And as it's getting transformed from Satyagraha into a massive organization, and that other thing happens, which is the destruction of the Khilafat movement just energizes the, you know, Indian Muslims into like fifth gear or whatever, and they're just like, last remaining bastion of Islamic power and culture and civilization and thought is being ripped apart by these bloody Europeans and British and so on, and we have to defend the Khilafat. You know, even today we get very emotional about it, right? They have to defend it. So, like, it was huge. Millions of people said, we don't want the Khilafat to be destroyed. Although they had nothing to do with the Khilafat directly, they're really far away, but they really felt as a symbol of Islam. So what happened was that Gandhi decides now, with his non-cooperation movement, to support the Khilafat movement. So Gandhi's Satyagraha and the Khilafat movement, boom, they come together. At this, just like, the British are just like, okay, what the bloody hell happened here? This is just like something that they had not calculated at all. Number one, that the Indian Muslims would explode over the Khilafat issue. Number two, that this guy would come and he would say, yeah, I'm pro-British, but I'm not going to cooperate with you. It's like somebody saying to the Vice Chancellor, sir, you are the best Vice Chancellor that ever existed, but we are not going to take our exam or something, I don't know, whatever it is that you don't want to do, right? And he's pulling the peasantry now into what was otherwise an urban movement. He's pulling them in. And so now the Congress party and the Khilafat movement come together in the first nationwide mass agitation against the British. This is sweeping across India. You have to understand the scale at which this is going on is just absolutely enormous. And this is one picture of it. You can see these are all people here, you know, in this. This is some other pictures of it. You can just see, I mean, millions. And the other funny thing, really weird thing, really interesting thing that happens is that the Khilafat leaders, they begin to invite Gandhi and Hindu Congress leaders to come and address the Muslim community inside the mosque. सोच सकते हैं आप, आज तो तस्वीर ही नहीं किया जा सकता. मस्जिद में बुलाते हैं कि लोगों से बात करें, आएं, क्योंकि they are supporting the Khilafat movement. So these leaders, Hindu leaders, not just like suited, booted, you know, liberal, whatever, tisham tats, mummy daddy type, but, you know, like dressed as a peasant and a Hindu with a, you know, whatever, tikka and ye wo jo bhi hota hai unka, going into mosques and they're addressing Muslims. It was like unheard of, unthought of. So mass movement erupts. British are very, very upset. They repress it. They stamp it out. Pata nahi kitne logon ko arrest ye wo, you know, the usual thing, right? But the other thing that happens, of course, is that Mustafa Kemal takes power in Turkey. There's his picture. And he first defends Turkey as a military man. And then later, by 1924, abolishes the Khilafat. He says, this is an outdated institution. We don't need it anymore. And he's a national hero. But he's secular, totally, and pro-Western, totally. So Gandhi also now calls up, so that momentum for the Khilafat movement is gone, because the Turks themselves, their own national hero has said, we don't need the Khilafat anymore. And the Turks are supporting Mustafa Kemal, Ataturk. Secondly, Chauri Chaura incident happens where these passive resistors of Gandhi take 22 police officers and they burn them, etc. They kill them and so on. And he's totally against that. He's like, if you cross the line of violence, that is against the principles I stand for. On the one hand, it's against the principles he stands for, ahimsa, from a religious point of view. But on the other hand, passive resistance also requires, if you engage violently against the state, well, the state has a monopoly on violence. There's no competition between you and the state as far as violence is concerned. So that's why he's very canny and clever. He's like, no, this is the line you cannot cross. If you cross it, I'll call off the movement. So he calls off the movement. Now, when he calls off the movement, of course, many people are disappointed. I'll just cover that in a bit. But Gandhi is sentenced to 6 years. He serves 2, and then he's let off on good behavior. Okay, chal tu ja fir. Also, he's making trouble in the, you know, jail or whatever. Jinnah is against all of this, all of it. The Khilafat movement, the Gandhian tactics. He's like, what are you doing? Of course, he never spoke Punjabi, but the point is, like, what are you doing? He saw the entire episode as an endorsement of religious zealotry, both on the part of the Khilafat movement people, as well as on the part of Gandhi. It's not just Gandhi that he was upset with. He was also upset with the Muslim leaders. He's like, "Ye kya kar rahe ho?" Because he was not pro-Khilafat. In fact, when Ataturk took power, he said, this is the man. He's doing the right thing. He supported Ataturk, not the Khilafat movement. And secondly, he was a constitutionalist. So whenever the British violated their own constitution or did something unconstitutional, he believed that those are the reforms that he needs to introduce. One second. But he did not believe that what Gandhi was doing by this passive non-resistance, which was breaking the law, not doing violence, but non-violently breaking the law, he believed this was not a good strategy. Okay? So he began to feel more and more isolated and alienated and resigned, etc., from the Congress in 1920. Got it? Understood? He finally said, this is too much. I'm not doing this. Bye-bye. Now, what happened to Indian nationalism here is that Muslims and Hindus had come together in this mass movement. Congress and Khilafat movement formed a new short-lived composite mass-based Indian nationalism. However, Khilafat leadership fragmented on political differences. Sayyid Ataullah Shah Bukhari and Chaudhry Afzal Haq created the Majlis-e-Ehrar-e-Islam, which was rabidly anti-Shiite and also anti-Ahmadi, very much anti-Ahmadi. You can read about it, some really good papers on it. But again, a kind of barrack communism, if you read about that. Pro-land reforms, that's also very interesting. Dr. Ansari, Maulana Azad, seen here, Hakim Ajmal Khan, remained strong supporters of Gandhi and the Congress. So part of the Khilafat leadership went into Congress, part of it came out of Congress. And part of it also joined the Muslim League. Those were the Ali brothers, okay, who were the main agitators of the Khilafat movement. They came and joined the Muslim League. Now, Muslim League had the difficult task of saying, of making the case that it alone truly represented Muslims. This is also the point at which you can look at the debate between Hussain Ahmad Madani, who was one of the leaders of the Khilafat composite nationalism, and Allama Iqbal, who is against that idea. And today, Jamiat-e-Ulema Hind, for example, in India, and Jamaat-e-Islami of India, and nearly all the religious fundamentalist parties of India, you can read their statements on the internet. They say, I'll send you the video as well, they say, jaan de denge, secularism bachayenge. Shocking! I know. Really shocking. यहाँ पे उलट है, जान दे देंगे कि तुम्हें सेक्युलरिज्म की बात करेंगे, तुम्हारी जान ले लेंगे. मगर it's the opposite there. They're like, we have to save secularism. So secular democracy is the only realistic future of India's Muslims, and he favored a composite Indian nationalism, whereas Iqbal insisted that nationalism was a Western concept, antithetical to religion. Nationalism had destroyed European religious institutions, etc. But this criticism was not against Muslim League nationalism. It was basically against that composite form of Indian nationalism. Now, Simon Commission. Simon came to examine what was going on in India in 1928. 1919 the British had made some constitutional reforms and made India into a diarchy. Simon, it was supposed to be reviewed every 10 years, so he came with a delegation of 9 people or 7 people to review it. But the commission itself had no Indians in it, not even one, which is why many people rejected it. Ye kya kar rahe ho? Lala Lajpat Rai got together with his supporters here at the Lahore railway station and confronted Simon when he came here. Lathi charge hua, ek lathi Lala Lajpat Rai ko lagi, and he died. When he died, that's when, who else was in that demonstration? Mr. Bhagat Singh. He decided, and then the Jallianwala Bagh incident and so on and so forth, right? So the Simon Commission was supposed to determine what was going to happen. Motilal Nehru, Jawaharlal Nehru's father, wrote a report called the Nehru Report, in which he tried to argue the case, counter the charge that there was no constitutional consensus on how to go forward, etc., which is what the British would always say, agar aapko independence denge, to you can't even get along with yourselves, etc. So Nehru wrote his report on it, that yes, we can. Jinnah wrote his rejoinder to the report, wrote his reply, which is known as Jinnah's 14 points. Motilal Nehru dismissed it out of hand. It's irrelevant, because by this time, Muslim League was not a serious and major contender or player in the national politics of India. The outcome of this was the Government of India Act 1935, jisme British gave Sumo mein they allowed the Indians to take representation, but not at the national level. National level, the British will handle all affairs, but provincial matters will be, Indians will be allowed into it. When the election occurred, then Gandhi also organized his famous Salt March, where he said, we're not going to buy salt from the British. He marched to the sea and said, we're going to produce salt from the sea. We're not going to buy from you. Again, arrests, whatever, this, that, and the other, all of that. So this campaign of direct action, tax resistance, non-violent protests against the British salt monopoly, again, continued to galvanize the peasantry. It really hit the peasantry. That's where the trick was. That's where he really turned the tables. Organizing, mobilizing millions with him. 1937 election comes about, and you can see, firstly, this brown area is jahan pe princely states hain, so no election there. Okay, that's where the whatever prince or nawab or whatever rules. Okay, sultan, nawab, whatever. And blue areas are where Congress wins the election, NWFP with Bacha Khan, etc. And this dark blue area is where the Unionist Party wins the election, Sir Sikandar Hayat. And red area is where United Party Sindh wins the election. So you don't see Muslim League pretty much anywhere right now. Muslim League wins, so Congress wins 707, massive number of seats. Muslim League wins 109. And Sir Sikandar Hayat alone in the Punjab wins 101. So massive electoral victory. So of the 428 reserved seats for Muslims, League just won 109. The League won 29 seats in UP, where it did well, where it had competed for 35 out of 66 seats for Muslims. In Punjab, it won just 2 seats out of 7 that it tried for. And in Bengal, it captured 39 out of 117 seats for Muslims, but could not form the government. So they were pretty much wiped out. Now, you can imagine one very important thing that happens in the Muslim League is then they say, you know, if we win these people and we win these people, and there's a party here that we can also win to our side, then we can be back in politics. But basically, now he talks to Sir Sikandar Hayat, and he makes a pact with him, which is very, very important, with the Punjab Unionists and with the Sindh United Party, etc. And he manages to make an alliance with these two major parties and eventually bring them into the Muslim League. That was his major and very important masterstroke. World War II rolls around in 1939, and the Congress, the Britain declares war on behalf of India as well. And the Indian politicians say, "Sanu to puche koi nahi." And so the Congress decides we're going to resign. We're not going to be part of this silly government that doesn't even ask us before going to war. So they resign. Jinnah says this is a day of deliverance. I wish the Muslims all over India to observe Friday 22nd December as a day of deliverance and thanksgiving as a mark of relief that Congress regime has at last ceased to function. I hope that the provincial, district and primary Muslim League all over India will hold public meetings and pass the resolutions with such modifications as they may be advised, and after Jummah prayers offer prayers by way of thanksgiving for being delivered from the unjust Congress regime. In 1940 now, Muslim League passes the Lahore resolution, which states, you should go to Minar-e-Pakistan and read it because it's written over there, that Muslim League will accept any, and will only accept any constitutional compromise on the principle that geographically contiguous units are demarcated into regions which should be so constituted with such territorial readjustments as may be necessary, that the area in which the Muslims are numerically in a majority, as in the northwest and eastern zones of India, should be grouped to constitute independent states in which the constituent units shall be autonomous and sovereign. So the Lahore resolution was to create these states in northwest, which is today Pakistan, and east, which is Bengal, Bangladesh, and create them in such a way, first and foremost, that you get a Muslim majority province, right? And these are Muslim majority provinces, etc. Thoda bahut usme territorial readjustments as may be necessary is fine with us. But once they group like that, they should be independent states with autonomy and sovereignty within India. So this is not really, today we call this a Pakistan resolution, but the word Pakistan is not mentioned in this resolution anywhere. It is Lahore resolution, and you see that the way in which it is written is vague enough for the Muslim League to accept any plan within India for a constitutional settlement between Muslim majority and Hindu majority areas. And that's the plan. That really is the plan. Give us more representation, like we got separate electorates. Give us more representation, give us more rights within the constitutional framework of India. Congress saw this as a ploy to play Muslim League against the nationalist movement. They said this is a British ploy. Finally, the British now, after having spent the last century pulling apart Muslims and Hindus, since the 1857 war, as I showed you, they've been pulling apart. On the eve, now World War II is finished, Britain is been destroyed by the Nazi attacks. It has no hope of holding on to India whatsoever. They cannot hold on to India anymore. It's hopeless. They know it. They're smart enough to realize this, and they're like, okay, we have to give them independence now. We've been delaying it for the last 50 years, or at least 30 years since the Khilafat movement. World War II ke zamane se hum delay kari ja rahe hain. One very important detail that I forgot to mention is that after World War II, when the League of Nations gathered, they created, World War I, thank you. After World War I, Europeans got together, the American President Wilson got together, and they said that we're going to redo the map of Europe. All the big monarchies will be broken up, and smaller European states will be created, organized around language, or organized around their nationality. When they did that when the League of Nations did that in 1919, they suddenly created like 20 odd new countries. When they did that, over 20 countries. When they did that in 1919, this is what got into the minds of all the Congress leaders, etc. If you are a nation, you have the right to become an independent country. You see, this galvanized all the leaders of India who were already Indian nationalists, etc., further to ask for independence and so on. So finally now, after 100 years of splitting us apart, by 46 they're like, okay, why can't you all just get along? Oh my God, you people are so dumb. You can't even get along with each other. Although you are the one that has been making us fight all these years, but now anyway. So they cobbled together this cabinet mission plan, which proposed a 3-tier administrative structure with a federal union at the top tier, individual provinces at the bottom tier, and groups of provinces as a middle tier. The 3 groups were proposed, called A, B, and C respectively. For North, West India, Eastern India, and the remaining central portions of India. So these groups would have widespread autonomy. Okay, there would be provinces, areas that would have, there would be provinces, then there would be these areas, and these areas would have widespread autonomy. These areas were basically West Pakistan and East Pakistan, what became West Pakistan and East Pakistan. Jinnah accepted it, but only under the condition as long as Punjab and Bengal were not partitioned. It's very clear about this. You cannot partition either Punjab or Bengal. Keep it together. Then it's fine. Congress did not accept it exactly on these grounds. Congress refused. They felt they had it enough with the Muslim League by now. They then decided partition. We are in favor of partition, not in favor of cabinet mission plan. So they opted for partition. Partition Punjab, partition Bengal. Let these be separate countries. Let Pakistan come into existence. And that is, of course, what made partition inevitable. And there you had independence, two independent states come into being, India and Pakistan. And मैंने यहाँ फैज़ का एक छोटा सा गीत लगाया हुआ था, ये दाग था उजाला, ये शब गुज़ीदा सहर, ये वो सहर तो नहीं कि इंतज़ार था जिसका वगैरह. But I'll skip that because time नहीं है. You can listen to it later. I'll send it to you. So finally, last slide. फिक्र नहीं करो. घबराना नहीं जिसे इमरान खान ने कहा. Ayesha Jalal versus Asma Barlas. What are they talking about? Well, Ayesha Jalal argues the case that it was basically Congresses intransigence. ढीठ हो गए थे, क्यों नहीं मान लिया कैबिनेट मिशन प्लान को, that led to partition and the creation of Pakistan. Pakistan's demand was really about constitutional rights within a united India, not outside of India. And it's because Congress did not accept whatever it was that the Muslim League was demanding that finally partition occurred. And in fact, Congress party voted for partition. Barlas argues that Jalal underestimates the importance of the rise of Muslim nationalism as a force on its own. Look, what the argument that Ayesha Jalal is making is one that makes Jinnah look a bit like, you know, he's sort of just manipulating the whole situation or something. But actually there is an undercurrent of Muslim nationalism that actually exists for a long, long time. And that is what is really helps us understand and explain the dynamics that you see here. Jalal and Barlas both agree that Muslim nationhood was a constitutional struggle, however, within India. It was not meant to, the demand was meant really to win constitutional rights, but within India. But then Congress finally said partition is better than accepting these demands. They also agreed that the Muslim League had no grassroots party machinery and was deeply factionalized by provincial concerns, which is why post-partition, when Pakistan was created, it just completely almost liquidated and could not handle the administration of Pakistan, run Pakistan. And Pakistan very quickly fell into the hands of a civil military bureaucracy that began to run the country rather than, and India went the other way because it had a large, massive grassroots party which was running the country. Here the party just kind of, after Jinnah especially, just kind of disintegrated completely and could not agree to a power sharing arrangement even within Pakistan. Okay? Sorry, but think about it this way. All your Pak studies that you took like, I don't know, 5 years to study, I covered in 2 hours. Thank you.